Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and as usual, it's shocking to think that we're coming to the close of this mini conference. It's been a terrific day. Sean Casserly is our closing keynote, but before we turn the time over to him, I just want to give a quick thanks to our conference sponsors, San Jose State University School of Information, the founding sponsor of the conference, terrific partner for this event, and Follett as well. Thank you so much to those two organizations. This is a chance for those of you participating live to indicate on the map where you're participating from. Look to the left of the map, look for the star icon, click on it twice. Oh, many of you know exactly what to do. You can put a note in the chat as well, letting us know the time, the temperature, the weather, anything else that would be fun. And keep putting those notes in the chat, although I am going to move us forward for the sake of time. The conference organizer, the theme organizer, has been Dr. Michael Stevens. I'm going to turn the time over to Michael at this point. Thanks, Michael.
Steve, thank you very much. There's the video. Hi, everybody. I hope everyone is well. I hope you have enjoyed the sessions. I've just taken in so much interesting information, some great examples. And here we are at the end. I just want to say a couple words about Sean, and then we will let him do his closing keynote. His formal introduction: Sean has worked in the library field for more than 20 years. He is the director of Johnson County Library. He's been in that position for the last 4 years. What I will say, and the reason that I asked Sean to come for this closing keynote, is I have the various shapes of learning in libraries and that evolution over the years has fascinated me, and I have been drawn to what Sean has done at his library numerous times, including a program that he may mention called Books and Butchers, that Sean sent me a photograph from this event that I use in presentations that I've given all over the place. And it's always so striking, and it makes people think way beyond what learning sort of stereotypically looks like in the library. So I'm honored to be introducing Sean, and I'm glad we have him here to close this conference. So thank you, Sean. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. As you said, I'm Sean, the director of the Johnson County Library here in Johnson County, Kansas, and I wanted to thank Dr. Michael Stevens and Dr. Sandra Hirsch for the opportunities to speak today and share my thoughts. So when I first started thinking about this speech, I was in a bit of a panic and a little fearful. And so my emotional state is best summarized by this poem by Emily Dickinson. I felt a cleaving of my mind, as if my brain had split. I tried to match it seam by seam, but could not make it fit. The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of reach, like bolts upon the floor. And so what I'm going to attempt to do today is pick up those bolts and get them in some kind of order. What Michael is alluding to is that we butchered a hog in the library. When I say butchered, it's different than slaughtered. The pig was already dead, and we had a local butcher kind of talk our audience through of about 150 people. We got a big ooh from the audience when he showed us where bacon came from, which I thought was interesting. So what I'm going to talk today is about Johnson County Library's story, and I'll just call it JCL. We're a suburban library system in close proximity to an urban area. So why are we talking about the library as the classroom, and what problems are our communities facing? Intuitively, it seems like the library has always been a form of classroom for informal learning, and it seems like a good idea to continue to provide that educational opportunity. But it wasn't until I was asked to talk about this issue that I started to look into some of the challenges people were facing and the complexity around these issues. I was listening recently to an online lecture by Thomas Friedman, who talked about the changing online environment and how it affected how we lived and worked. And he was in the process of writing a new book, so he thought it might be a good idea to go back and review his previous work, The World is Flat, which was published on April 5th, 2005, to see what he wrote about Facebook. Well, to his surprise, he had written nothing, because open registration for Facebook didn't occur until September 2006. So these are some of the companies that started post-2005: Twitter, Skype, Dropbox, the Apple App Store, where there are now more than 1.5 million applications available for me to download, and Google had yet to turn on its personalized searching algorithm. So can you think of an application that you use today that was created pre-2005 and compare it to the number of applications you've used on your smartphone post-2005? If you're anything like me, you just kind of have a plethora of apps that you've either installed and uninstalled on your device. And you don't really use those old apps anymore, though I'm probably guilty of still using Word. So information and the way that we connect is really changing. And I tried to get a figure on that by looking back at Watson, and Watson was the computer that beat everyone in Jeopardy. But I was wondering what Watson was up to now, because I knew that it was going in the medical field for diagnosis. And what I found was that it is predicted that medical data is expected to double every 73 days by the year 2020. Fortunately, in the IBM marketing brochure, Watson can read 40 million documents in 15 seconds. And so let's agree that Watson can read a lot of data. But it also kind of agree that what we thought about as the information age has really become the noise age. And what we have to do is filter that information that's relevant to us and separate it from the noise. Thomas Friedman states that he feels that the essential plumbing of the Internet has changed in the last 10 years. And I would tend to agree with him. The capacity to connect, share and collaborate, and manage workflows has gone from what Friedman coins as being interconnected, or this idea of hyperconnected, to really interdependent. So the world is great if you're a consumer. And if you're thinking about starting or running a business, it's really good. But if you're a worker, maybe the world is not so hot for you. And that's really what we're dealing with our patrons, well, the most of them, or potential workers. I feel work falls into one of two categories. It's either work that can be outsourced or work that can't be outsourced. So there is work that you think about today that you think, well, that can't be outsourced, but actually it can. And so I have a situation, kind of a personal story, and it's about my doctor. And my doctor is actually outsourced. So I have a muscular neurological issue, and I live in Kansas, but my doctor is actually at Mayo. And so all the communication I have with him is through Skype. I do some testing, but I sit in my living room, and he sits in his office, and we look at my test results and talk about changes in my condition. And then once, maybe every 6 months, I go up and see him, and they take some more tests and go through that process. But most of my interactions are with him online. So let's think about this. Isn't Airbnb and Uber a form of also outsourcing? Isn't it disrupting what we think about as hotels and taxis? So when you think about your work and your family and your friends, where do you fall? Is the job that you do today going to be around in 10 years' time, and can it be outsourced? So let's shift gears and look at the kind of state of education in the U.S. Pew tells us in a 2015 report that we placed 35th out of 64 countries in math and 27th in science. The really good news here is that we're making improvements. The bad news is that we are competing with the rest of the world. And the issues around education are vastly complex. If they were simple, we would have solved them. The question I ask myself is, how can libraries help build on our already existing learning ecology that we have? And I believe libraries have a really important choice. Are we going to survive in this environment, or are we going to thrive? At JCL, we have a mindset that we will thrive in a complex world. And how do we do this? We build strategic partnerships with organizations that have similar missions and visions. And this is where we're able to amplify the idea of the library as a classroom and to redefine it to meet our patrons' needs. This matches our first strategic goal, which is education. So for the last 6 years, we have partnered with Head Start and daycare centers to provide 6x6. It's 6 skills that you need to have by the age of 6. And we're really building on the read, learn, play research. So there are things like have fun with books, look for letters everywhere, notice print all around you, take time to talk and rhyme, talk, and tell stories about everything. And this initiative has been taken statewide in the state of Kansas. And I know many of you are doing similar work day in and day out. But here's an interesting thing. In the paper, Self-Corrected Online Learning, where it takes a look at MOOCs, they look at informal learning and where it takes place. And so does education need to be defined by time and location? In this study, it showed that people prefer to learn at home. And this makes sense, as I prefer to learn at home. I prefer to sit in sweatpants and drink a cup of coffee on my couch in an environment that I control. So the question we asked ourselves was, how can we remove barriers that would prevent access and learning for a person to create their own classroom experience whenever and wherever they wanted? And we looked at libraries such as Cincinnati Public Library and Kansas City, Missouri, were doing to solve similar problems. And the first step we took was to follow these library leaders and automate the registration of library cards. We know that our community is growing by 10,000 people per year. And as a new or existing resident, you can now, through your smartphone, tablet, or laptop, register for a JCL library card and have instant access to all of our electronic resources. If you come into one of our locations, you can have the card authenticated and then have access to our physical material. The key here is that the library is the key. The library card is the key that provides access to the portal of resources. And through that portal, we're able to offer tutor.com so teens can get their tutoring help when they need it with subjects specifically that they're struggling with from 4 to 11 p.m. daily. To complement this, we also do one-on-one tutoring within many of our locations. And so someone can actually come in, and the library acts as a connector between the tutor, the expert, and the student with the need. For the informal adult learner, we provide lynda.com and Universal Class. And I've taken courses on both of these platforms and have found them to be really outstanding. The study also shows that more than half of the respondents' learning needs are really around language. And so Rosetta Stone for us and Mango are the two kind of learning platforms or digital learning platforms that we provide. So before I talk more about the digital realm, I'd like to loop back to the physical world and the role JCL has played over the last 30 years with Johnson County Community College. We provide space in 3 of our locations where GED classes are taught. And every year I have the privilege of attending the graduation ceremony. So one graduate shared their story. As a mom, she would not have been able to get her GED unless she could have come to our local library. The library was close to her house, and her husband agreed to look after the kids while she studied. But she felt guilty taking the time away from her family, especially after she'd been at work all day. The success she had not only inspired her, but inspired her entire family, and she is now enrolled in a 2-year program at the community college. This simple step will have a ripple effect throughout her entire family and hopefully for future generations. Learning is about providing access to resources and removing barriers. One barrier we've removed for staff was that they only had one monitor. And what we did was to provide dual monitors to increase productivity and to increase your kind of virtual workspace. So here, I'm slightly ashamed to admit, but it wasn't until this year that we started providing dual 21-inch monitors in our public areas. It's fascinating to see people who have never experienced a dual monitor learn through observation from their peer patrons how to navigate this larger digital workspace. It's one small step, but in a continued journey again, which is this makes a difference in people's lives. There are physical changes we're making here at JCL, particularly at the Central Library. One of the things we did was double the number of meeting room spaces you can reserve. You can reserve these spaces online, and if they're not being used, you can just walk in and use them. And the decision was not without some dissent, as there was no guarantee that people would actually use these new spaces. But what we find is that they're constantly being used. They're being used by groups to collaborate on projects, or they're involved with some form of self-learning. So one story I'll share with you is about a young man, and I'll call David. This is not his real name. David was 22 years old, a single dad and homeless. He was sleeping in his car with his son until they could get into a shelter. He worked a minimum-paying job and would study at the library to get an online degree in physics. Dave now has an apartment and has a job as an online tutor to high school students studying physics, and these students span the globe. I would not have learned this story except Dave, now a volunteer at one of our branches, came down to the county budget hearing unsolicited by the library to share his story and to tell the commissioners why libraries matter and why they should increase funding. These stories happen at your libraries. They're hidden because the young man staring at the laptop is not necessarily going to jump up and share his life story with you. I would like to talk more about why I think informal learning is so important and why this doesn't detract from formal learning. In my opinion, what is happening with formal learning is that it's becoming cost prohibitive for many of our poorest and maybe brightest students. On average, in 2013, it cost you about $60,000 for books, tuition, and housing at a state college, and the prices just go up from there. And we know from the middle class has been shrinking, and our poorest families have lost 17% of their net wealth from 1989 to 2013. We know that the number of unwed mothers with a high school education or less has skyrocketed, and the Brookings Institution has shown that children born into poverty are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to school readiness. We have partnered with our county's Parks and Recreation to create story walks within our park systems that promote those 6 early childhood literacy skills. We continue, like we all do, to invest in our summer reading program, and we have created libraries in our juvenile detention center, and our library has a weekly book club meeting with the teams in that detention center, taking book recommendations. We have partnered with judges in a book giving program, especially when dealing with domestic abuse cases. And we have also partnered with our adult corrections and offer book services there. We have specialized libraries that have a primary Latino focus, and our staff are required to be bilingual. I have talked a lot about the library as a classroom, but I want to talk to you more about what we're doing is putting librarians into the classroom. Over the last 2 years, we have partnered with 2 different school systems and a group of teachers to talk about the book, Some of My Best Friends Are Black, by Tanner Colby. These school systems vary greatly. One was affluent, wealthy, and white, and the other was diverse and poor. And when I say diverse, it was black and Latino. Tanner came to the library twice, but spent most of the time at the 2 high schools and the community colleges, talking with the students and library staff. This book is now part of the curriculum within these schools, and the library acted as the facilitator that brought these 2 separate cultures together to have a conversation and to challenge some of the assumptions they had about each other. And you can check online on Vimeo. One of the student projects came out was the Truth About Troost, and Troost is the dividing line in Kansas City between the black population and the white population. I think there's some very interesting disruptions on the horizon, and it's my opinion that informal learning is much more participative by its nature. What I mean is that you have some self-interest in learning about the topic, and you have the freedom in self-learning to learn about it in any manner that works for you as a learner. Formal education is much more, in my opinion, prescriptive. There's a syllabus, there's a time and location you might need to be at. You're required to have a certain level of passivity, in my opinion, and to acknowledge the authority of the person teaching the class. In my opinion, it is much more focused on compliance than learning. To my own personal amusement at graduate school, one of my teachers still took roll and mandated that I call him professor, which I was happy to comply with, as it personally mattered very little to me what I called them, and it seemed to really make them happy. This form of education was created for a number of needs, but those needs were really around the Industrial Revolution. But if you are like me and succeeded and maybe thrived in this environment, then you may be conditioned to this learning structure and may have a bias to how people learn. The egoic thought is that I learned this way and it was good enough for me, so it should be good enough for you. And this may be true if the world had remained static, but the complexity of the world has evolved so dramatically in the last 10 years that the learning models of the past may not meet the learning needs of right now. How are you going to challenge this bias? And what are your conscious and unconscious biases towards learning and education? How does this bias affect how you create learning spaces in your library? Do they look like schoolrooms with chairs and tables facing the front? Or do they look more like living rooms with people facing each other? How you create learning spaces in your library will tell you a lot about how you think about learning. One of the interesting disruptive forces I see is makerspaces, and I was lucky in the creation of our makerspace here at JCL because I was confronted by a politician about why we were spending taxpayer dollars on three-dimensional printers, and is that really what a library should be doing? Fortunately, a patron had just created a prosthetic hand for his neighbor, and it was featured in a national magazine. So I just gave him a copy of the article, and it seemed to answer his question. So here's the question that I want to ask. Are makerspaces popping up because they are the most recent, cool, innovative thing, and every contemporary library must be seen to have one to be relevant, or are they part of a deliberate learning classroom experience you're attempting to create? The way you may want to reflect on this question is to ask if you have defined clear goals and outcomes around this experiential learning, and have you provided the right resources, meaning staffing and support, to meet these goals? Every community is different, and every makerspace can meet a wide range of needs. So I don't want to say that I'm being prescriptive, but I think it's good to reflect. I know that we are all patron-focused, but without an agile, adaptive, innovative, and creative staff, it's going to be a challenge to meet the changing service needs. So here are some of the things that we've done at JCL over the last 18 months at the management and staff level that I hope will create this adaptive, agile, and creative environment. Our management team has collectively worked through the syllabus, and this is the traditional way of going, through crucial conversations, because it was recognized as an organization that we struggled with conflict. And many of the crucial conversations we needed to have were being triangulated rather than addressed one-on-one with the person that had the issue. This has helped and created a shared language and expectation, and we use the books as a reference going forward. Managers have now gone also through and this is the untraditional portion of it, the 6th session of improvisational training. Okay, some of you might think this is crazy, and you could be correct. The issue we identified as the second issue for our organization after communication was trust. We were not a trusting organization, but we wanted to be. And the challenge was to create an experience that felt highly risky, but involved no danger. So improv seemed like a really good option, and it's worked. We have 40 managers. They're divided into 4 groups of 10, and we do an hour of improv once a month. It removes barriers, builds trust, and if you've walked around clucking like a chicken in front of your peers, you really can talk about anything else. So system-wide, we've also done collection summits, looking at the direction of the collection, and really pushed the decision-making down to staff. Administration is not involved with that. And we've also done a programming summit following that same model. If we are a learning, evolving organization, then time and resources must be committed to achieve these goals really in a meaningful way. The work that I think is on the horizon and that we really need to pay attention to as a profession is badging. Badging is a groundbreaking way of providing credentials. Traditionally, credentials are done through professional certification and degrees and accreditation. But this new idea of badging and micro-learning experiences shows a demonstration of skill or a completion of a project or task. There are a couple of organizations. One's called Collective Shift, and it's a spin-off from the MacArthur Foundation, and the other is lrng.org. And these organizations are at the forefront of how education, I feel, will be defined in the future. It's about creating a learning network that's interdependent and connects to people to learning experiences throughout their life, rather than just discrete portions. They're responding to this need because it's a societal need. And while it still may be in its infancy, it's the space that I feel that libraries need to inhabit. And I think this is the future of libraries as classrooms. Some communities you might want to look at is Chicago, DC, Dallas, and Pittsburgh. They have already been involved with this. So since I started with verse, I would like to leave you with verse to bookend my thoughts on learning in classroom. And this is a quote from, it's a Mentat quote, so if you're geeky, you'll know what I'm talking about. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of sophos that the thoughts acquire speed. The lips acquire stains. The stains become a warning. And it is by will alone I set my mind in motion. I'm grateful for your time, and I think I'm at the end.
Thank you, Sean. Wow, that was lovely. Dr. Sandra Hirsch is in the room. She is the co-chair of the conference. Sandy, did you want to close by saying anything?
Hi, sorry about that. Yes, well, I wanted to thank all of you for attending, and I want to give a round of applause to all of our fantastic speakers. They were wonderful. Thank you, Sean, for closing us out so brilliantly, and for everybody's engagement and participation. Everything I attended was fantastic and really thought-provoking and interesting. So on behalf of the School of Information at San Jose State University, again, thank you for participating and engaging with us today, and I wish you well in your continued development as library as classroom. So thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Michael Stevens. Thanks to everyone who participated today. You can use the hashtag Library2016, and maybe someone will post those quotes from Sean. You can also post them on the library20.com social network. Do go to library20.com to get information about our upcoming event in October, Libraries of the Future, which should be really a lot of fun. The recordings for this event have started processing. You should be able to see almost all of them within about half an hour, and we sure hope that you've had a good time. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.